would like now to call upon Rose Taylor to introduce the speaker. The microphone.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Being
Louder. Yeah, just over.
I'll try and speak very loud. I'll shout. Oh.
This is
Thank
for
you.
Ethel. The elevator.
Thank you. I'm not any taller.
Speaking to the mic.
Where is the mic?
Just to your right. Two of them.
Oh, this. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Can you hear at the back? You have to talk about it.
Being a newly appointed member to the board of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society, I couldn't have been presented with an easier and more pleasant assignment than to introduce our guest speaker, a member of our own family, Ethel Taylor. To begin with, Ethel really doesn't need an introduction, because I don't think there's anyone that doesn't know her. You were privy to an advance notice listing a little of her early childhood and of all her accomplishments in our community. I won't repeat what has been printed, but I would like to share with you how her family and friends feel about her. Ethel is a very loving, loyal, and dependable human being. She has a keen sense of humor, is sincere, generous, and conscientious. She always has a ready smile on her face and carries a small gift bag at her side that she can reach into to share some of her homemade goodies or little gifts with you. She's an energetic, dynamic, and thorough worker for UJA in particular and our Jewish community in general. And yet, family is number one on her priority list. And she is definitely the thread that binds her family together. Her license plate reads ET10, but in reality she's much more. Irving teasingly refers to her as a 10 and a half. As a child, my friends and family were gently referred to as the Lower Town Bunch. For those not in the know, Lower Town was the area of downtown Ottawa below Rideau Street. In any case, we would rarely come anywhere near Billings Bridge. Consequently, when it was mentioned, it seemed so remote and far away. And yet, today we walk by the Billings estate when we head down to the river to exercise. Amazing how things change. So please sit back, relax, and listen to Ethel take us back in time when the Jewish immigrants, your parents and grandparents, settled in a then small, unknown, faraway community referred to as the Billings Bridge area of Ottawa.
This is what y'all came for.
I thought my wedding day was a lot of preparation. Anyhow, I want to, first of all, welcome all my family and friends who are here tonight. It is so great to see everyone. I'm especially happy to have my daughter Susan and her husband Mark and their children, Stephanie, Jennifer, and Daniel from Toronto, and my son Brent with his lovely wife Risa, and Shira, their daughter Shira, and of course my husband who was always there for me. I've kept him pretty busy the last few days. As most of you know, I am Ethel Taylor, daughter of Bessie and Sam Greenberg. I'm the fifth of their 6 children, Johnny, Doris, Benny, Alan, and Jack. All of us were born during the years my parents lived in Billings Bridge. When Lawrence asked me to speak about my parents and family, I felt it was important to start at the very beginning with my grandparents. My research proved so interesting that I decided to include some of the history of other Jewish immigrants in my talk. I was fascinated how diligently this small community of dairy farmers, peddlers, and market gardeners struggled to make a living. I hope you will all enjoy this history of Billings Bridge and the Greenberg family. And please keep in mind that I'm not a professional writer or speaker. After all, I'm just a farmer's daughter. The Billings Bridge estate, which exists today as a museum, was left to the city by the Billings family. I encourage everyone to visit the Billings Museum, which is at the south end of Cabot Street. For those who are interested, we have brochures on a table at the back of the room. You can take them home. The Billings property consisted of 1,400 acres, which included most of Alta Vista, as far south as Kilbourne, and north to the Rideau River and Riverside Drive, and also from Bank Street and surrounding areas where the Billings Bridge Shopping Center is today. In fact, I think some of the people here are living in the houses that were farms in those days. The Billings family were a very kind and generous family and rented out various parcels of land for gardening purposes to the Russian Jewish immigrants. The Billings family did not sell off any of their land at that time. By the late 1920s, 38 Jewish families had settled in Billings Bridge. My paternal grandparents, Bela and Mordechai Greenberg, were among the earliest settlers in the area. They came to Billings Bridge with many other Russian immigrants and started a small community. This large photo on display, the one in the middle, was taken in June 19, 1910. I don't think I was around then. In Billings Bridge. It is the wedding of my grandfather Mordechai's sister, Rose Greenberg, to Moshe Palmer, parents of Molly Foman and Nunny, and the late Abe Morris, Betty Stotland, Jenny Rubin, and Ray Siegel Ages. What is particularly interesting about this picture is that the people in it are the grandparents and the great-grandparents and relatives of many prominent families still living in Ottawa today, some of whom may be here tonight. I'm delighted to say that I am one of them. As a matter of interest, this photo was taken in front of the home of Yenta and Mayor Held and the home of the bride and groom. After my talk, I'm sure that most of you will want to take a closer look at this wonderful picture. As you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. My father is in this picture. He was in his early teens then, and as I was not born yet, I was probably just a twinkle in his eye. Please listen carefully as I mention some of the 38 families who settled in Billings Bridge around the 1900s, many of whom are in this picture, and I'm sure a lot of you will know. Some of the families of Billings Bridge at this time were Yenta and Meyer Held, parents of Sarah Pollock, Esther Diamond, Abe Held, Clara Friedman, Ben and Louis Held. Ethel and Coleman Genscher, parents of Joe, Ann Rudd, Minnie Kurt Pass, Benjamin, Bertha, Bella Kornblatt, and Jessie Kaufman. The Rose and Roger Greenberg family also lived in Billings Bridge, and they were the parents of Louis, Gilbert, Jenny Schinder, Irving, Gracie, Corinne, and Lori. Libby and Benjamin Dubinsky family also lived in Billingsbridge, and they were the parents of Abe, Lillian, Sarah Shore, Phil, Izzy, Joe, Charlie, and Oscar. The Ben Dworkin family also lived there, as well as the Markovich family and the family of Sam, Jacob, and Louis Baker. My Aunt Libba and my Uncle Usher Braitros, parents of Joe and Tilly Wilner Atlas, and my Aunt Esther and my Uncle Baruch Murray, parents of Joe, Gordy, and Abe, also lived in Billingsbridge. Other families included Annie and Joe Kratzberg, parents of Betty Rose and Sid. Bessie and Leo Cronick, parents of Esther, Sadie, and Ruth. Another very well-known family who lived in Billingsbridge were Alexander and Isabel LeBreton, who were in the dairy business, and after whom LeBreton Flats was named. The LeBretons were the grandparents of Pat Flesher and Suzanne Campbell. Regardless how they had earned a living in the old country, farming and peddling were among the only options for many Jewish settlers. These were the best ways to start without capital, to get established, and there was always food on the table. For sure, very fresh fruits and vegetables. Laser and Esther Greenberg, parents of Mo, Mike, Sam, Rachel Soloway, and Rebecca Shore, opened a general store in the front part of their house in Billingsbridge. They sold groceries, meats, flour, and bulk cereals. Laser Greenberg was a kind-hearted individual and very generous, and everyone in the area knew it. During the Great Depression, he delivered groceries to those in need without knowing when or if he would be paid. When he passed away, his eldest son, Mo, Bess Greenberg's husband, operated the store. Another son, Sam, B. Greenberg's husband, founded United Fuels. And yet another son, Mike Greenberg, Sybil Mirsky's husband, became a lawyer. Mervyn Greenberg is the sole surviving first cousin. Mervyn worked in the Greenberg store, delivering to customers, but he actually lived in the city. Another Billingsbridge family were Shifra and Samuel Spivak, parents of Ruth Soloway, who were in the fur business. Most of the Jewish immigrants started as market gardeners and peddled their products. Some immigrants started off as rag pickers and would ride the streets calling for rags, bottles, and bones. Kalman Genscher, the dairy farmer, supplied the Jewish community with milk for Passover. Mr. Dworkin also retailed his own milk, and Isaac Greenberg, my grandfather's brother, also sold milk to Ottawa Dairy. As well, Mrs. Dworkin made cottage cheese to sell. Her son Ben remembers her stirring the concoction on the stove and hanging it in cheesecloth bags. Cottage cheese was popular among the Jewish community as an inexpensive source of protein, and it's still a very popular item today. At the beginning, many immigrants chose dairy farming and then went into market gardening. Independent retailers transported their milk by wagon in 5 or 6 gallon pails and measured quarts into the purchasers' containers. However, when bottling and pasteurization of milk became mandatory, most farmers stopped retailing their own milk to avoid taking on the extra cost of buying and sanitizing bottles. Most of the farmers were happy to let the dairy business go in favor of market gardening, which was less grueling and more satisfying work. The rich soil of Billingsbridge was also a major asset. They sometimes faced obstacles due to the reluctance of seed companies to provide credit to them. There was always a struggle to make a living, but they seemed to manage. This close-knit of Jewish immigrants were very orthodox, and they decided to form a little shul, a synagogue, in their own homes. Mayor Held owned the Sefer Torah, and the minyan was held in his home, and also in the home of Laser Greenberg. Mayor Held was a scribe, a sofer, and from time to time officiated at a Pidyon Ben, which is the redemption of the firstborn son. A sofer must know every meaning of the letter of the Torah before he can follow this calling. Mayor Held was a sofer, a Kohen, and a very learned man. Mr. Bernard Leaf, Mr. Moshe Kransberg, and Mr. Rachmiel Krona came regularly from the city to teach the children Hebrew lessons. In the whole community, work stopped on Friday night in order to observe the Sabbath through until Saturday evening. Abraham Baker, grandfather of Barry and Allen, was the chazan who came to visit and perform religious services. Mr. Herschel Glustein was also a chazan, but he lived in Billingsbridge and also taught the children bar mitzvah lessons. Harry Soloway was the first member of the Soloway family to arrive in Billingsbridge. Harry brought over his parents, Anya and Label Soloway, and his younger brother, Hy, in 1923. Hy was 11 years old when he attended my parents' wedding in 1925. He said that my father sat proudly like a king, and my mother was a shy little princess. Hy did not know a word of English when he arrived as a young child, but in a very short time, he excelled in school and won scholarships. He moved to the city, attended university and law school, and became a very well and highly respected lawyer. Another family who lived in Billingsbridge was the Progrosh family, grandparents of Caroline Balin, Sam, Lawrence, and Ben. The children lived in the city, and Caroline remembers going to her grandfather's farm to pick fresh corn. The only members of the Leaf family who actually lived in Billingsbridge were Leon and Minville Leaf. Other Billingsbridge families were Sura and Isaac Greenberg, grandparents of Nathan Greenberg, who were among the very first immigrants to settle in Billingsbridge. He was my grandfather's brother. Isaac spoke for and helped many new immigrants settle in Billingsbridge. Lorne Green, radio announcer and popular TV star of Bonanza, lived with his family in Esther and Laser Greenberg's house for a short time and then moved to the city. The Brent family also started out in Billingsbridge but moved into the city when they opened an upholstery business. When Nathan and Sarah Greenberg, parents of Gertie Budovich and Irving Greenberg, were married in March 1920 in the town hall of Billingsbridge, it was the social event of the year. There were no caterers at that time, and everyone helped by bringing homemade food and baking to the wedding. Justice Abraham Leaf, as a young man, provided music for the wedding as part of a group. My Aunt Hannah and my Uncle Moshe Spector, parents of Irene Otis, Jean, Sam, Sally Rubinoff, Jaime, David, Nelson, and Bertha, also lived in Billingsbridge. Hannah, who was my father's sister, was widowed at a very young age and brought up her 8 children alone. They lived in the gatehouse next to the Billings house that today is used for the volunteers of the Billings estate. After they grew up, most of the family and the children moved to Toronto. Other families who lived in Billingsbridge were Etta and Jake Greenberg, parents of Sam, Harry, Archie, Mo, Bessie Chronic, Sarah Levine, Abe, Ben, and Barney. They had pretty large families in those days. It was very normal to have at least 8 or 10 children. Ethel and Jack Taller, parents of Anne Zaslav, Morton, Edith Zaslav, Mosey, Faye, Sam, Liz Ruthman, Eva, Norman, and Archie, they also lived in Billingsbridge. Hesse and Yaakov Yosef Genscher, parents of Eva Pollock, Tilly Kirzner, and Harry Genscher, also lived in Billingsbridge, as did the Rivka Pollock family, mother of Jack, Sam, Nathan, Gordon, and Fanny Taylor, who was my aunt, actually, after I married Irving. Not only Jewish families lived in Billingsbridge. Among the non-Jewish families were the Merkleys, who owned a brickyard. The Herons, which Heron Road is named after, also lived there. The Christies and the Stewarts. I only named a few of the families that lived at that time. There were certainly many more. The little gray house that still stands on the corner of Riverside Drive and Pleasant Park is one of the oldest houses in Ottawa. I was told that the Stewarts lived in that house in the early 1900s. The children of Billingsbridge attended elementary school in a little red schoolhouse. A larger school for the intermediate grades were situated behind the little red schoolhouse. As I mentioned before, by the late 1920s, there were about 38 families living in Billingsbridge. However, things began to change. The Jewish families began to move to the city in the late 1930s. By 1950, the Jewish community of Billingsbridge had virtually vanished. The small Jewish cemetery in Billingsbridge was expropriated by the city to make way for the airport highway. The bodies were reinterred at the Bank Street Cemetery. Eventually, Mr. Billings started to sell some of the land for development, and Robert Compo built one of his first housing projects there. Sarah and Nathan Greenberg left Billingsbridge in 1960 after living in the Gatehouse, the same house my Aunt Hannah Spector had lived in earlier. This house exists today as part of the Billings estate. Sarah and Nathan Greenberg were the last Jewish family to leave. Their departure marked the end of the Jewish settlements at Billingsbridge. I recently received a very interesting story about Billingsbridge from Shirley and Phil Teitelbaum, who still live next to the Billings estate. The Teitelbaums informed me that when they moved to Ottawa in 1963, the Billings family were living in the large house with their children, and two of Mr. Billings' sisters lived on Park Hill Circle, the small circle facing them. After Mr. Billings died and the family moved out of the family home, the property was put up for sale. At the time, Mrs. Ryan, wife of Frank Ryan, owner of radio station CFRA, and sister to Mayor Charlotte Whitten, put in an offer to buy the home with a view to demolishing it and putting up a residential development on the site. A great hue and cry arose, and the entire neighborhood banded together. Amazingly, Charlotte Whitten loudly joined on the residents' behalf. The result was that the neighborhood prevailed, and this beautiful area was saved. Subsequently, it was purchased by the City of Ottawa and has been put to very good use since then. I encourage everyone to visit the Billings Estate and Museum. There are pamphlets at the back of the room to take home with you. I would like to thank the staff at the Billingsbridge Estate for all their help and support. As a matter of interest, the residents of Billingsbridge, the Jewish residents, went into Ottawa to buy their kosher meat. In the early 1900s, there were several kosher butchers. The following were kosher butchers in the 1900s: Goldfield, Lippalaken, and Mr. Cohn. Later on, the kosher butchers were Weinstein, Rudman, Cantor, and Zabar. The early bakers were Richstone Bakery and Brill Bakery. That was in the 1900s. Later on came Bodnoff, Mossian Bakery, and the Rito Bakery, which is owned by the Kardish family, bakers of the best rye bread and challah in the world. And it's not because they're related to me. According to Justice Abe Leaf's memory, the price of rye bread in 1912 was between 4 and 7 cents. The two best-known barbers around that time were Mo Frumkin, known as Mo the Barber, and Nathan Lang, who not only cut hair but cut prices. For your information, in the 1930s, the price of a haircut was about 2 bits, or 25 cents. Now I shall focus on the Greenberg family. The best is yet to come. My paternal grandparents, Bela and Mordecai Greenberg, arrived in Ottawa in the early 1900s with their 3 daughters and 1 son, Chana, Chaya, Sima, and my father, Sam, known as Mika, who was an infant at the time. I don't know why my father was called Mika, but Mika he was. My grandparents were the exception to the rule because they were actually farmers in the old country. They had one of the nicest gardens in Billings Bridge. They grew everything they could, tomatoes, cucumbers, and all varieties of vegetables and fruits, and of course rhubarb. My grandfather Mordecai was a short man with lovely blue eyes with a twinkle in them. I'm told he had a lively curiosity of the world around him. He was also interested in music and history and Bible stories. He had a great sense of humor and loved children. He had spent time in the Russian army as a bugler. He was tough on the outside, but a cream puff on the inside. My grandmother Bela was a woman of high moral character and very religious. She was a hard worker who never stopped cooking and cleaning, even though her health was not the greatest. She was a strong-willed but very kind person, good-natured, a good sense of humor, and she loved children. My father was introduced to my mother Bessie by her brother Borif Murray. It was love at first sight, but there was a communication problem. My father spoke English and a little Yiddish, and my mother only spoke Russian or Yiddish, but as we all know, actions speak louder than words. They must have communicated well because they produced 6 children. My father had taken over the family business in Billings Bridge, which was market gardening. He always felt that his produce was a little better quality than anyone else's due to the personal care he took with it. Even though he grew and sold many varieties of fruits and vegetables, he was known in the trade as the rhubarb king. He sold to the farmers in the Byward market, and he always charged 5 cents a dozen more than anyone else. He had 6 children to feed. By the way, the picture that you see on the easel was a picture taken of the York Street Market in 1911, where the market gardeners sold their produce to the market vendors. And you'll see the picture on your left. My father was one of the first to arrive at the market early in the morning and one of the first to sell out his rhubarb, which was only one of the many items he sold. My father was short in stature, but a giant in his trade. He liked to bargain, and when he went to Henry Burke's and Sons to buy my mother's engagement ring, they gave him their price. He said, "That is your price, and now I'll give you my price." And sure enough, he got the price he bargained for. My father was well respected by everyone who knew him. He also had a great sense of humor. A funny story he used to tell us was one day he got on a streetcar with a transfer. The conductor said, "Sir, this transfer is past due and old." "So," father replied with a smile, "throw it away." A couple of weeks ago, when I was in Toronto, I had the opportunity to visit Justice Abe Leaf, who, God willing, will be 100 years old in March. He has a remarkable memory, and he remembers a great deal about Billings Bridge because he used to accompany his father, Bernard Leaf, who taught Hebrew lessons there. Justice Leaf was a delight to talk to and confirmed a lot of my information. He told me the following story. Justice Leaf's father, Bernard, had a colt, a baby horse, that needed training, so he took it to my father's farm. My father trained the colt so that he could use it to pull a buggy for transportation. It seems that my father was a man of many talents. My father's farm was situated where Billings Bridge Shopping Center stands today. In 1954, it was only a strip mall with 8 stores. F.W. Woolworth, Bata Shoes, Tamblin's Drugstore, Warren's Menswear, Canadian Pure Bank of Commerce, Loblaws, Fairweathers, and Reitman's. 4 of the original stores that are in the shopping center today were the four that were there in that time, were Loblaws, CIBC, Fairweather, and Reitman's. For your information, these were the four remaining stores that stayed up until this time. And Billingsbridge Shopping Centre was the first shopping centre in the city of Ottawa. My father was involved in the Free Loan Society as a volunteer. The Free Loan Society was a group which helped Jewish people in need. Of course, first and foremost, my father loved his shul, which was called the Murray Street Shul, now Masiki Adas. When he retired, my father enjoyed going to the stock market exchange to watch the ticker tapes. He also enjoyed attending the city courts, sitting in on various trials. I think he would have been a lawyer for sure. His favorite afternoon coffee stop was the Old Beau's Lunch. After it closed, he used to go to the Honeydew every afternoon on Bank Street. My father was a man of his word, and a handshake was as good as a signed document. My mother, who was known as Pessa or Bessie, was the youngest of her family. She came from a little village in Russia known as Ternivka, which is shown on the map on the easel. We were very fortunate to get the map, which a friend visited Russia, and it's a Russian map, and I think it's the only map that shows the little village of Ternivka where my mother was born. My mother came to Billingsbridge with her mother, Bertha Murray, to join her brother Boruch and two sisters, Gitta Lith and Libby Braitros. My mother was a beautiful young woman with auburn hair. She was very shy because she did not know a word of English, although she did speak Yiddish and Russian. When she met my father, it was love at first sight. They were married March 25th in Billingsbridge Town Hall. Shortly after, they raised a family of 6 children. My mother worked very hard, helping my father bunch the rhubarb and various chores around the farm. At the same time, she looked after us, providing delicious homemade meals always, and doing the housework as well. My grandmother Bertha, who we used to call Bubba, was also a great help to my mother. We were all looked after with tender, loving care. In 1937, we moved to the city to Giggs Street for 1 year, and then to Sweetland Avenue in Sandy Hill, where we all remained until we married. In later years, Sweetland Avenue was designated as a heritage street because of the architectural design of some of the homes. My mother always wanted to improve her English, and especially her spelling. She could never understand why the word knee had a K in it. So I said, Mom, just call it knee. She was very persistent and signed up for classes for newcomers at the High School of Commerce. Her teacher happened to be Saul Ross, a professor at the University of Ottawa. Saul, who recently moved away, was actively involved in the Ottawa Jewish Community Center. Saul and my mother took a great liking to each other, and Mum would always bring him homemade cookies and mandel bread. Those classes were a great experience for Mum because she started to improve her spelling and thus became more confident. We were all very proud of her. She was also a very independent woman, and every year she went by herself to the Ottawa exhibition for the day. She loved to listen to music in the grandstand and visit the various booths. One time she left for the day, and when she arrived home, she thought it was very strange that the front door of her home was open. The front door of her house was wide open when she came home. When she went inside, the TV was gone. She immediately called her son Johnny and couldn't understand what had happened. He replied, Mom, you were robbed. Johnny was absolutely right, and that's exactly what happened. There was another incident. My mother was with my brother Alan, who was driving the car, but Alan didn't realize he was driving the wrong way on a one-way street. My mother noticed that all the cars were going in the other direction. So she said, Alan, why are all the cars going the wrong way? Someone asked my mother how come she had so many children. She replied, in those days in Billingsbridge, there were no TVs, so what else was there to do? Her home was always open to all the children in the neighborhood. They could drop in any time for a delicious homemade cookie. Anytime I visited my mother, there was always someone at the door. She always had a lot of children around her. My mother also thought that a psychiatrist was not a real doctor. Actually, this describes my mother's personality and sense of humor. She reminded me of Gracie Allen, and the name stuck. Many of us, even the grandchildren, often called her Gracie. We had several Jewish neighbors on Sweetland Avenue. They were the Schaefers, the Cohns, the Kleins, the Kaufmans, the Weltmans, the Lamperts, the Shankmans, and the Finkelsteins. Anna Levinson, mother of Morris, Lil Dabrowski, Margie Eisman, and Bessie, lived a few doors away from us. Our doors were never locked. My mother and Mrs. Levinson often baked together. I can picture them stretching the dough for knishes on the kitchen table. Our two families became very close, and we considered each other relatives. My mother belonged to pioneer women. She was very observant and a regular shul goer. My parents' whole life revolved around their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, who they loved very much. My father believed it was very important for the boys to have a good education. My oldest brother, Johnny, was very mechanically inclined, and I remember when he was in high school, he bought an old car, took it apart, and put it all back together again. He graduated Ottawa Technical High School, went on to Queen's University, and graduated as a mechanical engineer, having had the practice as a teenager. He worked for Pennock Engineering and Consultant Company for approximately 1 year. While working with them, they built the Royal Military College in Kingston. After that, Johnny opened his own company. His first job was to redesign and build a new storefront for Ritz Limited, which was a block from the Bay on Rideau Street. This was the start of his construction business, which was called Mastercraft Limited. Johnny went on to build many buildings in Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver. His company is currently building a 400-apartment condo project, which includes an 87-room hotel 2 blocks from the Sky Dome in Toronto. Johnny is married to Gladys Viner. They have been blessed with 4 children and 11 grandchildren. My sister Doris, of blessed memory, was a wonderful person. Unfortunately, she developed multiple sclerosis at a very young age and passed away at the age of 59. In spite of her illness, Doris raised a beautiful family of 4 sons as a single parent, and then was blessed with 14 grandchildren. Doris did a great job of raising her children. She was always surrounded by her children. Doris graduated Lisgar Collegiate, and she worked in the government until she raised her family. She always had a smile on her face and never complained. She had a great sense of humor and a wonderful disposition. She was very popular and had very many loyal friends. My brother Benny showed his musical talents at age 5. My mother entered him into a talent show at the old Rialto Theater on Bank Street. He sang on the Good Ship Lollipop, and he won first prize, and the prize was 18 pints of chocolate milk. The winner automatically went on to the next talent show on CBC Radio called Uncle Jack, which Benny also won. The prize that time was 2 boxes of chocolates. Growing up, Benny always enjoyed music, and with his bar mitzvah money, he went to Harry Nathanson's pawn shop on the market to buy an instrument. He really wanted to buy a trumpet. There weren't any, so he bought a second-hand clarinet for $15. He chose to attend Ottawa Technical High School because he had heard that they had the best band in the city, and he joined the band. My mother always took me to their performances because Benny always had a solo. He entered the Kiwanis Music Festival and won many prizes. One prize he won was music lessons, because in those days nobody had lessons. This started Benny on his career. While he was studying to be a chartered accountant through the Queen's University Correspondence course, he had his own orchestra and in fact played at my wedding as well as many other weddings and bar mitzvahs. He also played in the Governor General Foot Guards. He earned his CA, which prepared him for the business world. Today, Benny is the owner of Ray Neon Signs, which manufactures neon and plastic signs. He is also the owner of Portomatic Inc., which sells and services overhead and automatic doors. He is still very involved with his music. He volunteers his time at various retirement homes. Benny is married to Dorothy Silverman, and they are blessed with 3 children and 3 grandchildren. My brother Alan graduated from Lisgar Collegiate and received his medical degree from Ottawa University. Alan specialized in internal medicine. He interned at the Jewish General in Montreal and also in the hospitals in Florida and San Francisco. He enjoyed the California weather so much that he ended up staying. He and his wife Jackie live in Long Beach, California, and are blessed with 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Alan was very close to our grandmother Bubba and spent a lot of time trying to teach her English. They also sat together many nights listening to classical music. Bubba loved to look at the pictures in Alan's anatomy books when he was going to school. As well as his regular medical practice, Alan was also a doctor on staff of several retirement homes. He was highly respected. Alan wishes he could be with us tonight, but unfortunately he could not. I think it's getting a little cool for Ottawa for him to come from California. Alan is semi-retired now, but continues to visit some retirement homes. My brother Jack, the youngest of our family, graduated Ottawa Technical High School, attended University of Ottawa, where he received his PhD in biology. Jack won a scholarship to study in London, England for 1 year. He returned to school and became a pharmacist, which he enjoyed. For many years, he worked at Kmart Drugs at Saint Laurent, which he eventually owned. Jack is semi-retired now and chooses his hours of work. He is blessed with 2 daughters and 1 grandchild. My first cousin, Frances Markson, is here tonight. Frances is my father's niece, the daughter of his sister, Chaya. We all consider Fanny as one of our siblings. Fanny and her mother lived with us in Billings Bridge, and a lot of my information came from her. She went to school in Billings Bridge, and later on she moved to Toronto to pursue her career in music. She studied at the Toronto Conservatory of Music. Fanny has the most beautiful operatic voice. If you're good, she might sing later. She returned to Ottawa and worked in the government. When she retired, Fanny volunteered her time to teach literacy and a lot of worthwhile projects such as visiting the sick, helping the unfortunate and elderly, just like Florence Nightingale. Fanny has a remarkable memory, and I want to thank her for all her help in preparing for this evening. Last but not least, I'm the second youngest in the family. And although my father wanted a doctor or a lawyer for me to marry, he agreed to accept my choice of Irving, son of Bertha and Sam Taylor of Ottawa. Irving and his brother Chick were in the grocery business for 45 years. When Irving asked my father for my hand in marriage, he promised there would always be food on the table and that he would take good care of me. My father would be happy to know that he took very good care of me, and he still does. I attended Lisgar Collegiate and graduated from the High School of Commerce. I had ambitions of being a nurse, but decided to get married instead. Irving and I are blessed with 2 children and 4 grandchildren who are all here tonight. I know Bessie and Sam, our parents, would be very proud of their children today. We have each contributed to the community in our own way, and we'll continue to do so in the future. At this time, I want to thank Lawrence Friedman, who convinced me to give this talk. Although I gave up golf, bridge, almost Irving, and a lot of free time, Lawrence, I have to admit, I really enjoyed doing it. Thank you sincerely, Lawrence, for giving me this special opportunity. Thanks to my cousin Fanny Markson, who provided me with so much information about the Jewish population of Billings Bridge. Thanks also to Dawn Logan of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society for all her wonderful help, always given pleasantly. And thanks to Elaine Brodsky for her kindness, patience, and help. And thanks also